Turning now to the day's top political stories, President Trump has doubled down on his tariff threats against China on Twitter, arguing that the U.S. has been losing $500 billion a year for decades. And as calls grow for embattled EPA Chief Scott Pruitt to resign, President Trump defended his appointee as, quote, doing a great job, but totally under siege. And Stormy Daniels' lawyer has promised a, quote, major announcement exposing the identity of the person who reportedly threatened Daniels to keep quiet about her alleged affair with President Trump. Joining me now to discuss this, GOP strategist Evan Siegfried and Democratic strategist Tara Dowdell. Tara, I want to start with you. Trump is back on Twitter pushing the tariff drumbeat after the Dow fell over 500 points yesterday over fears of a trade war. How could this play out for a president who counts on a strong economy for so much of his support?
Well, I think it's going to continue to do damage to Donald Trump. You see, he's no longer bragging about the stock market, which was what he was bragging about before, even though he inherited a stock market that was performing very well. I think the problem for Trump is this is the way he operates. It is chaotic. It is ill thought out, ill prepared, and that's the way he functions. And it's erratic. He responds and reacts based on things that he sees on television, segments that he sees, and that is not a recipe for effective governing. He often surprises his own administration and fails to ever look at the consequences of his actions. That's not to say that there aren't issues around our trade deficits that should be explored, but they need to be explored in a thoughtful way. It can't be based on your ego. It can't be based on political expedience and whipping up the base. That is not a recipe for effective management of the economy.
And Evan, Trump's threat to impose another $100 billion in tariffs on China, it could have some unintended consequences for the GOP. Bloomberg speculates that these tariffs could wreck the party at the ballots this fall. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, Tara says that these tariffs do damage to Donald Trump. They do more damage to the American people and the American consumer. Tariffs are taxes and taxes are tariffs, and there's no way around it. And China has yet to even retaliate in any significant fashion, and look what has already happened. If China really wanted to go after us, they would start limiting the exports of rare earth minerals and metals that the United States is the biggest consumer of. And we use those to become microchips and put them into cell phones, cars, GPS systems, and Americans are 100% reliant on it. So if China limits that, Trump would be, and the American people would be in significant trouble. It would remind me of the hamburger crisis of 1946, which caused Republicans to take the House and the Senate by overwhelming odds in the midterms after World War II with a very good economy. I think that the president has failed to understand that China's retaliation is doing significant damage. Take the wine industry, an industry near and dear to my heart, where you have China about to become the second largest consumer of wine in the world, and the tariffs they have proposed in retaliation against California, Oregon, Washington wines would cost the American economy $1.62 billion a year, and it would absolutely cripple the American wine industry, while Europe would flourish.
And Tara, let's talk for a minute about other issues going on within Trump's administration. We know that he is now publicly defending Scott Pruitt, but the AP is reporting that he was in a meeting with the president yesterday fighting for his job. How do you think the president really feels about the head of the APA?
Well, I think that Donald Trump probably wants to keep Scott Pruitt in place. The issue is that he can't keep Scott Pruitt in place. What Scott Pruitt has done, he has been the biggest grifter in the Trump administration. The security detail that he has that's costing millions of dollars, the flying first class. Literally, after being exposed the first time, he just escalated his behavior. So it's getting to the point where he's dominating the headlines, and that's when we know that Trump makes his move. He makes his move when the headlines are just being dominated by a member, yet another corrupt member of his administration, and it doesn't matter what he's saying publicly. We know that he's praised people on many occasions publicly, and then he's tweeted that they've been fired.
And Evan, what do you think? What do you think the president should do with Scott Pruitt?
Well, first of all, you know, the person who's most upset at the situation is former Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham, who lived almost rent-free on a boat in Washington, D.C., provided to him by a defense contractor who had business in front of his committee, and that was in 2006. Duke Cunningham went to prison for 8 years and 4 months because of what he did. And Scott Pruitt, for something very similar is basically right now still holding his job. There is zero accountability in this Trump administration, and it's absolutely outrageous. Scott Pruitt needs to not resign. The president needs to actually fire him, even via Twitter, because that humiliation would be deserved considering what has happened. What we've seen is that the president promised to drain the swamp, and because a lot of Americans are angry at the dysfunction in Washington. But Scott Pruitt is the ultimate swamp creature. He doesn't care. He feels like he can abuse the powers of his office to suit his own wills. And I think that it's brave that Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Ileana Ross-Layton, and other Republicans have stood up and said he needs to go. And I also applaud the Democrats who have done that. It's a moral and ethical issue that we're facing, and the Trump administration is refusing to hold people accountable for wrongdoing.
Yeah, why is it, do you think, that Trump still has Scott Pruitt's back after all of this?
I was going to say Trump has Scott Pruitt's back because Scott Pruitt's behavior is not unlike Donald Trump's behavior. So Donald Trump is the person who's ultimately gotten away with the most wrongdoing. And so he, again, as I said earlier, he does not care about what Scott Pruitt has done. What he cares about is the repercussions of what Scott Pruitt has done and continues to do. It's the headlines. It's the taking away from Trump making the headlines. It is not actually the act of wrongdoing. There is a reason why so many in this administration are behaving the way that they can, because the example is being set at the top.
And Evan, I want to give you a chance to answer that question as well. Why do you think that Trump still has Scott Pruitt's back after all of this? Donald
Trump likes Scott Pruitt because he's gotten results. But Donald Trump forgets that you could put anybody in there because the Republican Party, for the most part, holds Scott Pruitt's views and would be able to execute what he has done. Donald Trump could have somebody who's a no-drama person running the EPA, getting all of the results that Scott Pruitt has gotten, and not essentially having these really scandalous situations. I have to also say that the person who's probably happiest with the Scott Pruitt story is Ben Carson, because that's pushed his $31,000 dining out of the news. And also Ryan Zinke with what he was doing. I mean, it's sort of who's going to cut out or overshadow the latest controversy, and Scott Pruitt's probably hoping to find somebody, but right now he's the target.
It's quite a long and impressive list there. Evan Siegfried and Tara Dowdell, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.